Hey everybody, this is Dr. Jacobs. Welcome to Module 8, where we're going to go over emerging and early adulthood. So after we get through this unit, there's a few things I want you to be able to do. I'd like you to be able to describe the emerging adulthood developmental phase. I'd like you to be able to explain social clocks and what it means to be on time or off time. I want you to be able to identify and provide examples of post-formal thought. I want you to be able to explain Perry's scheme and its stages. I want you to be able to explain dialectical thought and provide examples. I want you to be able to identify examples of the stages of Levinson's theory. I also want you to be able to explain how resolving the intimacy versus isolation stage may impact further development. I want you to be able to explain the different parts of attraction. Identify the types of love based off of Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Distinguish among adult attachment styles. Identify and explain the stages of parenthood. I'd also like you to be able to identify and provide examples of Holland's 6 personality work types. And I'm actually going to have you do an activity where you identify your own. Hold on to the results from that because you can use that for your final project. And they're kind of fun to have even if you don't incorporate it into your final project. I want you to be able to, lastly, be able to describe and provide examples of flow and how it relates to finding a career. All right, let's get started. So emerging adulthood and early adulthood are kind of smushed into this one unit. Traditionally, most developmental textbooks or developmental psychology textbooks will have an emerging adulthood unit, and then they'll just identify the other part as adulthood. This is the first lifespan development materials where I've seen them call it early adulthood, and then kind of really neglect emerging adulthood mostly. So I'm going to define both of these for you, knowing that emerging adulthood falls into the early adulthood stage that the materials provided for us. So emerging adulthood spans from about 18 years old to 25 years old. Okay, so emerging adulthood spans from about 18 to 25, while early adulthood spans from 18 years old up to 40 years old. Okay, so I'm including both of these here because emerging adulthood is typically the stage that we're going to talk about. The materials do speak about early adulthood being from 18 to 40, so I thought I would just share both of these with you. So something that I like to discuss with my students in the face-to-face version of this class is, when does a person become an adult? So you don't have to discuss this out loud unless there's multiple of you watching this at one time that's in this online class. You could even journal this. When does a person become an adult? Think about it for a minute. You know, like in the in-person class, we'll hear a bunch of different things. People say when someone's emotionally mature or financially stable, or they have a career or children. And I always kind of joke around that I really realized that I was an adult when I got myself a watch. Notice I'm not wearing it anymore, so maybe I'm not an adult anymore. But the point where I had to have a watch so I can make sure that I was on time to a whole bunch of different meetings and things like that, and the responsibilities that came along with navigating my own personal and work life as a fully independent adult. But it would be really interesting to know what each of you all think too. So let's talk about emerging adulthood a little bit, and there's a little bit of an introduction. Something that's super fun is that emerging adulthood, this developmental phase, was actually created in Missouri. And so there is a researcher that was based out of the University of Missouri. He's no longer in Missouri. He's at a different university now. But he developed the stage. He coined the term for it. And he does a whole bunch of really cool different research too. His name's Jeffrey Arnett. So if you've ever done a reading on how a lot of samples and research are done on weird populations, so that's him. So it's like Western educated, and then there's a whole acronym for it. He did that, and it seems like every cool thing that I end up wanting to study, he ends up being the researcher behind it. So, and he's really nice. So if you're just curious, he is a very nice person. Let me use one of his measures in a study that I was doing, but it was invented here in Missouri. Again, it spans from about 18 to 25 years old. And I think if we really look at least within American perspective, within our culture, because this does not exist in every culture, here, this is a different type of time where a lot of times students are, or people in 18 to 25 are students, or they're trying to figure out their career path, or, they're doing some sort of training. They're not completely financially independent, and this is not true for everyone. But many times people are not fully independent during this stage, and they're trying to figure out what kind of life are we going to want to live. And so the main task during this time is to explore and prepare for adulthood. And so a related construct that was not in our module materials, but has been a part of other textbooks that I've used in the past, is this concept of a social clock. And so a social clock is basically a culture-based timeline for social milestones throughout the lifespan. So for example, people might expect you to go to college after high school or not, or they might expect you to get married or have kids, just depending on what culture you are a part of, or cultures, there's different expectations for different parts of a life. And so they'll say that you're on time if you're meeting those milestones like people think you should, and off time if you don't follow this cultural expectation. And with my in-person class, we talk about this. When does this start? And really, I think it all starts with that question: what do you want to be when you grow up in kindergarten? It doesn't end after that. And so they ask you that, and then when you're a senior in high school, they're like, where are you going to go to college, or what are you going to do after high school? And if you go to college, they're like, what's your major? And what are you going to do when you grow up? And if you have a romantic partner, are you going to get married? And if you get married, they ask, are you going to have kids? And if you have one kid, they ask, are you going to have another? Right. And then if you have two kids, they ask, are you thinking about a third? And after you have three or four, they're like, are you going to stop? But there's all these different milestones that people can push you on just by being a part of a culture. And I think something really important to keep track of is that there's no real timeline. It's all fake. And so whatever decisions you make sure that you're making them for you and your family or friends, or but in terms of however you're living your life, if you're choosing to have a family. But ultimately, whatever you choose is your choice. You don't have to choose what the dominant culture or even subdominant cultures are trying to influence you to do. It's your life. You get to choose it. And hopefully that's something that you'll be able to deconstruct and reflect on in our final project. There's also post-formal thought. So this theory is actually not Piaget's, although it's an extension of Piaget's work. Post-formal thought was created by neo-Piagetians. So these are new Piagets, right? Or people are extending his research. And the way that they describe it, it's a uniquely adult form of intelligence that involves being sensitive to different perspectives, making decisions based on one's inner feelings, and being interested in exploring new questions. And this comes from one of the previous textbooks that we used to use. Our materials describe it a little bit in a different way, and they say that post-formal thought is practical, realistic, and more individualistic, but also characterized by understanding the complexities of various perspectives. And that's really important because although we develop theory of mind when we're children, sometimes we still don't get quite the complexity of people's different perspectives, and that people aren't typically all wrong or all right. And we'll get into that as we dissect post-formal thought a little bit more. And so one of these neo-Piagetians developed something called Perry's scheme. And what they did was they studied Harvard undergraduates, and he saw that cognition shifted from when students first came to Harvard as they developed in their studies. And it followed 3 different stages, and it went from dualism all the way up to relativism. And so let's talk about what each of these means. So dualism, so when these undergraduates came, they first had absolute. Things are black and white, right and wrong, very firm and rigid. But as people expanded their cognition or their studies and allowed their brains to be opened up a little bit more, and they challenged their own beliefs and biases, they found that Then undergraduates develop something called multiplicity, and that's recognizing that some problems are solvable and we just don't have the solutions to all problems, right? We don't know the answers to everything. Then that went on to relativism. So this is kind of the last stage of Perry's scheme, and understanding that the importance of specific context of knowledge, it's all relative to other factors. So you can be given some details, but without knowing context, you really cannot make a decision. And so furthermore, talking about post-formal thought, it will involve a discussion of dialectical thought. And this is one of the most advanced aspects of post-formal thinking. And in this, you can bring important aspects of two opposing viewpoints or positions, synthesize them together, and come up with new ideas. And this is very advanced. Sometimes people are like, what, how can you synthesize two opposing viewpoints or positions? And a lot of times we're brought up to think that things are just so black and white, and that if people don't believe what we believe, then they're wrong. But really, there is a more advanced way of thinking about things and understanding and being able to sort through opposing viewpoints, two different opposing viewpoints, and seeing what the best pieces are and being able to bring them together to find solutions and new ideas. And something that goes along with this is the ability to see that there's both right and wrong in almost every position, every idea, every situation, and even in people. And so this moves us on to some transitioning into adulthood. So this is Levinson's stages. And he breaks these up by age. So the first stage of Levinson's stages is early adult transition. And this typically happens between ages 17 and 22. And this is leaving home, leaving family, and making some of those first decisions about career and education. And then from about 22 up to 28, they call that the entering the adult world stage. And this is like committing to an occupation, defining goals, finding intimate relationships. Then the next stage is called age 30 transition. And this is reevaluating those choices and perhaps making modifications or changing one's attitude toward love and work. Then we have the settling down stage, which is from ages 33 to 40. And this is reinvesting in work and family commitments, becoming involved in the community. And it's really interesting because as we follow some of these different stages, some of these are going to sound very familiar when we work through psychosocial stages, because some of these things are echoed just in a slightly different way. Then we have midlife transition, which happens from about 40 to 45. And during the stage, sometimes we see a reevaluation of previous commitments, making dramatic changes if they're necessary, giving expression to previously ignored talents or aspirations, and feeling more of a sense of urgency about life and its meaning. And then our next one then is entering middle adulthood. And typically this goes from about ages 45 to 50. And this is committing to new choices made and placing one's energies into these commitments. So in this unit, we also have a very large portion that's dedicated to finding love. And so if we look at Erik Erikson's theory, if you remember, that's the psychosocial theory. The next stage after, so the last one that we examined was identity versus role confusion in the last unit. But in this unit now we move on to intimacy versus isolation. And Erikson would say that during the stage, the challenge is finding someone to be emotionally close to or living life in isolation. Typically when we talk about this, most books, not the materials that we have for this semester, but most books would indicate that they're talking about romantic love and partnerships. But our materials also indicate that maybe friendships can take up some of the space as well. And so while we're talking about love, the module materials also mention different parts of attraction. Okay, and so they say there's 4 things that might make you attracted to someone. One is just being geographically close. proximity, right? So proximal means you're close. And it's really interesting, the discussion about, do people necessarily have to be geographically close anymore because of online dating and online dating apps and things like that? But they would say proximity, or being able to stumble upon these people, is one part of attraction. Another one is familiarity, and that's being repeatedly exposed to someone might actually make you develop attraction for that person. Similarity, and this means that people who are similar in thoughts, desires, and attitudes often will be attracted to one another. And the last one, which is great, is reciprocity, and that means that you're more likely to pursue someone if they feel the same way about you. Which moves us on to the triangular theory of love. And I think this one's awesome because this theory is actually developed by Sternberg, which we saw when we discussed the triarchic theory of intelligence. It is the same researcher. And I always joke that he must really, really love triangles because he has two of them that have three parts. So the triangular theory of love indicate there's three parts to any type of love. There's commitment, or being committed to the individual and the relationship; intimacy, which means emotional closeness, not sex; and then passion, which then would be sex, according to this theory. And so if we look at this theory, there's this triangle. We see that we have passion in one corner, we have intimacy in one corner, and commitment in the other. And we have these different types of love. So they would say if you're emotionally close, you like someone, right? If you have passion, so if you're having sex, they call that infatuation. If you're committed to somebody, but you don't really care for them, you're not friends, and you're not having sex, that's called empty love, or empty marriages, a lot of times they'll call it. But then there's different combinations, right? So if you have sex and emotional closeness, they call that romantic love. If you have emotional closeness and commitment, they call that companionate love. They have passion and commitment. I always butcher this one. So it's infatuation. So fatuous love. And then if you have all three, which Sternberg would say is the gold star of the type of love, you have emotional closeness, a sexual relationship, and commitment to that partner. This does not apply to everyone, but this is just one theory of love that's out there for sure. There's also adult attachment styles. And there's three major ones that we're going to talk about. One is secure attachment. So people who have secure attachment, that means they're not afraid of getting too close or being abandoned. About 60% of adults have this type of attachment style. Some attachment researchers would say that a lot of this stems from childhood, and if you're able to form secure attachments with your caregivers. But with adult attachment styles, this refers to a romantic partner. Then we have anxious avoidant attachment style. So these people appear not to care much for their partner or their romantic relationship. They can feel uncomfortable if someone's depending on them, or if they have to depend on other people. So these people come off really standoffish. Then we also have anxious resistant, and these people with this type of attachment style worry that other people don't love them and that they can't get as close to others as they would like. And so if we look at these, the healthiest type of adult attachment style is secure attachment by far. And you can kind of think of what types of problems you might have if someone has a relationship between someone who has anxious avoidant attachment style and anxious resistant. So you have one person who needs their space and one person who needs zero space. And so if they get a fight, I need my space, don't leave me, don't leave me. I need space, don't leave me, don't leave me, which drives a bigger wedge apart. Or if you have two people that have like an anxious avoidant, and you're like, why are they even a couple? They're never together. They don't spend any time together. They don't depend on each other. What's going on there? Or you might have anxious resistant if you have a partnership. And yes, there can be polyamorous relationships and two. I'm just boiling it down to two people right now to make it easy to explain. But if you have people in anxious resistant and both of them are, then they have no space. They're super needy. So these are clingy people, and they go into a cave and you never see them again because they're just spending all their time together. We also have different stages of parenthood. This first stage is the image making stage. This is planning for a pregnancy, where parents start trying to plan what it might be like to be a parent and how they might accommodate for a child. Stage 2 is the nurturing stage. So this is when they have an infant, and this is when they start developing an attachment relationship with the child and adapt to having a new baby. going through baby boot camp stage, right? Stage 3 is the authority stage. This is typically in toddlerhood and preschool. And this is where parents start creating rules and trying to figure out how they're going to guide their child's behavior and how they're going to engage in discipline. Then we have stage 4. This is typically in middle childhood and the interpretive stage. And this is when parents start helping their kids interpret their experiences in the social world that's beyond the family. Stage 5 is the interdependent stage. This is when parents start renegotiating their relationship with their adolescent. And then allow for like shared decision making while they start to get ready to launch their kid into adulthood. And then we have stage 6, the departure stage. This is when their child's in early adulthood and parents evaluate their successes and failures as parents. So next, I want you to pause this video and I want you to go into our module materials, and there is a link for you to be able to complete Holland Code personality type inventory. So I want you to take this, answer as honestly as you can, and then it's going to give you your code. And I want you to save your results. So make sure you take a screenshot of this. This might be something that you want to incorporate into your final project and reflect on as you think about what major you have and if it really fits what you like and what you're passionate about. So after you do that, then we'll come back here and continue with lecture. So after you've taken the inventory, you'll see that you have certain personality work type. A lot of times what you'll see is you'll have like 3 top ones. So it might be artistic, social, conventional, and you have a code, and those line up with different types of jobs. You may have even taken this already. A lot of high schools are doing a lot of career planning where they're having people do a lot of inventories and things. But there's different types. There's 6 different ones. There's a realistic type, investigative type, artistic type, social type, entrepreneurial type, and conventional type. And all of these work together. And after you take the inventory, you can read up more on your different types and you can reflect on that and determine, hey, what might you want to do with your life? You get to choose. So does it fit with what you're saying that you enjoy? And so then we're also going to talk about flow. This is something that was not in the module materials this week, but it's something very important to kind of think about as you think about your skill level and your passions. And so flow is this thing, and you may have heard it before where someone says they're in the zone, right? So for example, you'll hear that a lot with basketball players or athletes where they say, man, I'm really in the zone where you stop thinking and you're in the moment and you're able to just operate and do these really great things. This all actually comes from something called flow research. And so if you ever have a really high challenge and really low skill, what happens? So you have this huge challenge and you don't have the skill to be successful. You probably start having a lot of anxiety, right? Or you might start feeling really bad. So what happens when you have high challenge and high skill set, you actually go into the flow channel. And this flow channel is in the zone, right? So I don't know when I became a nerd, but at some point I became a nerd and I realized like I will lose hours to doing research because I actually understand it now. I'm working really hard to investigate new things. It's challenging me, but I have a high skill set now that I've been doing it for a while. And I'll lose track of time because I'm just there in the zone, in the moment. But then what happens if you have a high skill and then low challenge? If you say you have really great skills and you're just not being challenged, you get bored. So while you consider your career path, you might really want to think about what are your skill sets in? What kind of job is going to challenge you to do your best so that you can continue to grow and be generative as an adult? And these are really great things to think about. These are great things to think about while you reflect on what you're going to write about in your final project. And they're all really great things to think about while we think about emerging adulthood and even early adulthood. So that's all we got for this week. I look forward to keep going on with y'all. We actually don't have a whole lot left of the semester, but y'all are doing great. So thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.